So our second keynote address will reflect the spiritual dimension of our human existence as the basis for peaceful coexistence. And the speaker is Shastri Robert Gailey, senior teacher in the Halifax Shambhala community. Welcome, Shastri Gailey.
Everybody from the coffee, but actually, go get some if you want some.
Yes, my apologies. I was a little confused over who was doing introductions. So I'll be the moderator again, and hopefully at the end we'll have time to respond to questions. As a Unitarian Universalist, you may get from my questions, you may get a drift of my congregation. The address this morning from our next speaker, Shri Robert Gailey, is titled The Spiritual Dimensions of Human Existence as the Basis for Peaceful Coexistence. Robert, as fate would have it, I just received an invitation this morning to celebrate something called Openly Secular Day. I don't know if anyone else got that invitation. It's on November the 15th of this year. Openly Secular seems to be one of the fastest growing religions in Halifax. Robert, I welcome you, and I look forward to hearing your understanding of the spiritual dimensions of human existence and how we might explain that those who would define the world spiritually very narrowly, or as in the case of the openly secular, those who shy away from the idea of spirituality altogether. Thank you.
Well, thank you to the organizing committee and to Talib Abadali and Robin Arthur for inviting me here today. The conference motto, One World, One Humanity, points to a noble aspiration to find the common ground and apply our sensitivity and intelligence toward building a sane and sustainable global culture. In my talk today, I will present an understanding of human existence, spirituality, and the foundation for peace based on the teachings of Shambhala Buddhism, as proclaimed by my teachers, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and Sakyang Mipam Rinpoche. I could spend a long time recounting the deeds and writings of these two extraordinary people, but we'll save that for another time. Suffice it to say that they are both holders of the Kagyu and Nyingma lineages of Tibetan Buddhism, who received education in the traditional monastic framework as well as Western University. They have dedicated their lives to the articulation and propagation of the teachings of Shambhala, a Central Asian kingdom flourishing around the time of the historical Buddha, around the time of 500 BCE. These teachings survived in the Tibetan culture and are being restated now in the West. They apply a sacred view and practice to the challenges and demands of human existence and thus cultivate a spiritual dimension of human experience. But they also address secular concerns about how to live a fulfilling human life and cultivate a flourishing society in harmony with the natural world. The seeming victory of the materialistic outlook has provided many with the possibility of a relatively secure physical existence, but a bleak view of the possibilities of life. It is also clear that the pursuit of heavenly ideals alone can lead to an unwillingness or inability to address suffering and work toward healing the wounds of individuals and society. Overcoming wars, large and small, peaceful coexistence, requires a vision that joins the intrinsic sublime aspects of experience, otherwise known as spirituality, with the practicalities and wisdom of the earth on which we live. What is the basic nature of humanity? In the Shambhala Buddhist tradition, birth as a human being is considered the most fortunate of circumstances, not because of its opportunities to accumulate wealth, influence, or control of the environment, but because it affords the opportunity for recognizing our basic nature that is free from the blinding ignorance, entrapment by our desires, and impulsive aggression towards ourselves and others. From this perspective, the basic quality of human existence is one of unconditional goodness that is sane, gentle, without fault, and free of fear. Although we may experience fear, fixation, and ignorance, these qualities are not fundamental to our nature. The Buddhist approach is to not accept this as an article of faith, but to discover for ourselves the nature of mind, the nature of our humanity. The core practice of this journey of discovery for Buddhists is meditation. The practice of meditation is the practice of simply being. When we sit down, we feel our bodies in the meditation posture. We feel our breath, our sense fields of sight, sound, smell. The practice of meditation provides a space that can accommodate the full appreciation of the richness of feeling that is a constant in our lives. Appreciation and feeling is an important aspect of meditation because without it, our habitual speed can often lead to an alienation from ourselves. In a state of alienation, we cease to truly know ourselves. We can even come into conflict with ourselves, waging internal warfare through conflicting emotions and self-hatred. This internal conflict can lead to a sense of bewilderment, dissatisfaction, and loss of confidence and health. That in turn can lead us to objectifying the source of our dissatisfaction to be an external condition, person, or group. Conflict with others is the inevitable result. As Sakyong Mipam Rinpoche says, at this time, great confusion and suffering exist because humanity cannot simply be. The first step in unraveling conflict with the world is making peace with ourselves. Making peace with ourselves. Through the practice of meditation, we quickly discover we have a thinking mind, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes stormy and full of emotion, sometimes calm like a lake on a windless day. The mind moves through narratives and stories of all kinds. In meditation, we witness this discursive mind without a filter, seeing directly what the mind does, how thoughts arise, how they develop, come to a crescendo, how they cease one after the other. This can be a shocking and uncomfortable experience at first, but with practice, we begin to see patterns emerge from the chaos. We gain some measure of familiarity. We see how thoughts trigger emotions, how emotion triggers thought, how we make judgments, sometimes one way, and a moment later, the other. We begin to see how we establish psychological territory, how we defend it, how we identify friends who do not threaten it, how we identify enemies who do. If we are familiar enough, we see that the ornate tableau of self and other, friends and enemies, making love and making war, are all our own creation. At that point, genuine tenderness and insight is possible. At that point, we see through our self-generated strategies for maintaining our personal territory, otherwise known as ego. We witness the emergence of clarity, sense of humor, and kindness. We discover that those qualities were present all along, but they were obscured by our own self-infatuation. Therefore, the Buddhist meditator can confidently take the view that I am basically good, kind, wise, and worthy, and by natural extension, see that others are basically kind, good, wise, and worthy. What is the spiritual dimension? The recognition of our basic worthiness can be a gateway to the sacred outlook, or an introduction to the spiritual dimension of human experience. With this key insight, a practitioner can confidently begin to work with others with the understanding that no matter how deeply ingrained or painfully expressed hostility, distrust, and paranoia may be, it is workable. It is workable because aggression and distrust are not fundamental to our nature. They express the fiction that we are innately flawed, confused, and fearful. This fiction is scrupulously maintained and acted on. It might be a very resilient fiction, but is fiction nonetheless. We may experience a sense of relief that, in fact, we are not permanently entrapped by our raging desires, firm hatreds, and blind ignorance, or even our slight and delicate passions, irritations, and oversights. That initial relief can develop into an appreciation of the open quality of experience. Openness, or lack of preoccupation, allows for appreciation of what is happening in the present moment. The meditator learns that abiding in nowness is a wellspring of energy and a source of healing. We could discover that our five senses are not simply functional, but have depth. They are direct connection to the world that pre-exists our tendency to categorize, conceptualize, judge, or ignore. We can discover the depth of feeling that is our nature. We can also notice that we have an additional sense faculty that may have gone unnoticed: the human heart. In this tradition, the mind does not reside in the head and consists solely of thoughts and the logical pathways they follow. But the mind resides in the heart, not the pumping muscle, but the center of our body, our psychosomatic heart, which allows us to feel the world without a filter. We can feel another person's joy and suffering. We can develop empathy and compassion. Now we begin to develop conviction that to be a truly useful person, we have to cultivate true seeing that enables skillful, appropriate, and compassionate action in the world. Developing this sense of true seeing of the heart allows for the healing of the deepest wounds, one's own and others. It becomes evident that we carry emotional and physical wounds, sometimes hidden, sometimes visible. These wounds come from being subject to the cruelty of others, poverty, bad fortune. They can also come from our own actions that have inflicted pain on others, a pain that endures in our consciousness. Denial of these wounds can lead to a sense of unworthiness, powerlessness, unresolved anger, depression, or bewilderment. One has to wonder to what extent destructive crimes are carried out because of a confused sense of self-worth that extends into a confused sense of the worth of others. Spiritual traditions approach an understanding of human existence with different assumptions, methods, and goals, but all seem to recognize that how we behave as social beings is an expression of our alignment with the spiritual or unconditioned dimension of our experience. Unconditioned means primordial, that which exists before all else. In this case, unconditioned means unconditioned by habitual patterns of attraction and revulsion, unconditioned by our personal wounds, unconditioned by the social injustice that may surround us and cause seemingly endless suffering. Nothing about this path is particularly easy. In fact, we are defining a path that requires courage, perseverance, and faith. Faith is based on the conviction that we have a choice. Our existence can be governed by a small, self-centered point of view based on territoriality and fear, or a view that recognizes an unconditional goodness, along with an appreciation of our interdependence with each other and the earth. But beyond conviction, continued effort is required to recognize our ingrained habits of self-infatuation. Hence, the spiritual path is a lifelong path. How do we work with fear? Facing fear is a prerequisite to encountering ourselves and the world in a genuine way that can transform habitual aggression into peace. Fear is like a hot skillet. We don't want to touch it. We want to keep it away. But real life is not so accommodating as to allow us to ignore it. Sometimes we talk about fearlessness, being free from fear, but it seems that fear is always present in some form, from running out of orange juice, missing the bus, staining our favorite shirt, worry about our children, to a whole catalog of worries, including, will humanity survive at all? To allow our basic goodness to shine forth, we need to know how to work with fear. That means we have to be willing to encounter it, sit with it, go through it. Being willing to face fear, to go through fear, is elevating to a higher level our ability to make peace, both internally and externally. So from this point of view, we do not need to fear fear. In fact, it could be considered a gateway. If there is such a thing as fearlessness, it is accessed through the willingness to face fear. And what is on the other side of this gateway? Gentleness, a deeper heart, wisdom, and a recognition that we will not give up on humanity, even in the face of fierce cynicism and cruelty. To quote Sakyong Mipa Rinpoche from his book, The Shambhala Principle, a Tibetan proverb says that when difficult situations arise, the good become better and the bad become worse. When we don't trust our nature, challenging situations just feed our doubt and fear. Fear arises from a lack of knowledge. Because we do not know our goodness, we have trepidation and insecurity. That puts us in a self-protecting mode. However, when we feel our goodness, we become alert and caring, which takes us beyond hesitation about expressing our goodness. I call this being brave. Bravery is the key instruction within the Shambhala teachings. It means to embody the true nature of humanity, both personally and socially, with courage and insight. In short, it means to do the right thing. The teachings of Mahayana Buddhism define the bodhisattva as a person that has internalized the insights from meditation practice and takes a vow to dedicate their life and all future lives to work for all sentient beings. The Bodhisattva cultivates wisdom or true seeing that further empowers skillful and compassionate action. The lifestyle of a Bodhisattva can take many forms: a householder, a monastic, a leader, a worker, an artist, an athlete. The key characteristic is bravery. Bravery is not shrinking from the challenges of overcoming obstacles. It is a willingness to fully embrace our own humanity and the humanity of others. It is willingness to take responsibility for extending genuine respect to others, healing the social imbalances arising from violence, oppression, and war, and adopting strategies for sustainable living. Bravery can be cultivated through the practice of generosity, being willing to engage and offer. This can be physical offering of food, money, or work. It can be social offering, conversation, empathy, artistic expression, moral support. It can be spiritual offering, teaching, praying, ritual, celebration. The Buddhist proverb states, "Generosity is the virtue that produces peace." How can a sacred outlook affect society? Human beings are not isolated beings. We are social and express ourselves from our first day in relationship to other humans and the world we live in. After birth, we are in relation to our mother, father, caregivers through touch, feeding, gazing, sound, and smell. As we grow, we extend our reach into the world. We experience other people. We develop a sense of belonging, no matter how humble our circumstances. We develop bonds of affection and loyalty based on those that sustain us, help us, teach us, love us. We have a body. We breathe air. We eat food that grows. Our five senses, our hands and feet, if we have them, are all perfectly adapted to the world we live in. Everything built around us was conceived of, designed, and built by our predecessors. The bonds of our heart, the miracles of sight, sound, and touch, the intentions of our ancestors to ensure our well-being are the manifestation of unconditional goodness. We could say that society itself is a living being and arises as an expression of this goodness. Beyond the personal spiritual journey, we all participate and express ourselves through a social order. That social order, a family, group, religion, or nation, rests on shared principles. The nature of the agreed principles will determine conduct of the individual within society, as well as how that society conducts relations with others. We could view the day-to-day activity of society as a ceremony that is enacting those principles. The ceremony of raising a child, cooking a meal, going to work, learning, in addition to birth, marriage, worship, and death, all express these principles. A society based on the acknowledgement of unconditional good and wakeful qualities of the individual will express itself with joy and appreciation. A society based on a vision arising from the principle that human beings lack intrinsic self-worth, whether it is material or spiritual, will express itself in ceremonies of self-indulgence, doubt, and aggression. This can cultivate an atmosphere where fear and resentment arise because people lose touch with their innate goodness. When people are not genuine to themselves, they suffer. This level of distrust and suffering could lead some to separate themselves out of fearfulness and even attempt to bring all of society down with the mistaken view that fear and aggression are the natural order. This describes a society in a downward cycle, where shared objectives to develop and grow become rare. It is a society that will all be all too willing to objectify the evil outsider and resort to war to remove threats, which may in fact be imaginary. A society based on a vision arising from the principle that human beings are inherently awake, worthy, and basically good will manifest in ceremonies of connection, affection, and confidence. It is here that the spiritual dimension of human life can find its expression in society. And it is here that society can express itself in exploring the pathways to peace at the level of family, religion, or nation. Peace springs from basic gentleness, accommodation, and fearlessness. To coexist peacefully and approach a vision of one humanity, societies must be able to accommodate and respond to conflict and disagreement with creativity and appropriate action. To the extent that citizens and leaders have recognized their true nature and have tamed the impulsive, fearful mind, to that extent, they will be prepared to engage in the ceremony of peace with the rest of humanity. How can we heal the earth? In our age, peaceful coexistence among humans will be inextricably linked to deep respect for and communication with the natural elements, earth, water, air, and all living beings. From a scientific point of view, we know the incredible subtlety and depth of our interdependence with the world, and we know that as a species, our footprint is heavy and destructive to natural systems that are billions of years old. Certainly, scientific knowledge is a requirement for intelligent policy and skillful strategies for enforcing those policies. But scientific knowledge alone is not sufficient to bridge industrial society's disassociation of economic activity from its negative impact on the world. Environmental degradation is a systemic problem that accrues over decades and is supported by large populations. How can an individual hope to heal this wound? At this point, it might seem redundant to say so, but social transformation begins with individual transformation. So we can begin with healing our own personal relationship with the elements and all living beings. From the Shambhala Buddhist perspective, the world, even the so-called inanimate world, is alive. A rock, everyone's favorite inanimate object, sits on this earth, unmoving, possibly for millions of years. With open heart and open senses, we feel its rockness. It is as real as you or me. When viewed in relation to the earth, plants, and animals around it, it communicates a certain atmosphere beyond our personal projections on it. When we say alive, we are not talking about biological life or divine life necessarily, but energetic life, the self-expressing nature of wisdom. From this point of view, our world is filled with opportunities to connect to energetic qualities. Connecting to those energies is healing our relationship with the earth. Stated another way, this is a journey of cultivating direct communication with the sacred qualities of the world. This is not a radical idea or New Age thinking. It is very old. This is reality embodied and passed on by indigenous cultures around the world. In these cultures, one is born into relationship with the qualities and energies of the world. Society and daily life is built upon a deep respect for the earth as the giver of all things. If we have not opened to the subtleties of our own heart, our own perceptions, we will not be able to open to the subtleties of our world. our actions will reflect this and harm will result. To the extent we are sensitized, aware, and in communication with our world, our actions can enable a healing process and a prosperity based on a deep and healthy relationship. How do we protect a sane society? Propagating sanity and peace on earth requires us to know how to establish and protect harmonious society when and where it exists. A strong society does not seek war, but is realistic in its knowledge that there are enemies who would seek to disrupt and destroy it. This raises questions. How does a peaceful society cultivate the will and capacity to defend itself without objectifying an evil enemy? Do we have to retreat into a tribal attitude of us and them, based on paranoia to effectively defend the integrity of our society? Is it hypocritical to declare the basic goodness and decency of humanity and to simultaneously arm ourselves against those that threaten us? Do we mind our own business and assume that others, less peacefully inclined members of society, will take care of the unpleasant business of defense while we consider higher principles? Does a society have to sacrifice openness and generosity for protection from threats? Just asking these questions can provoke anxiety. First, because the answers seem so elusive, and second, because discussion of solutions could become political and may itself play out as disruptive conflict. But these questions point out that aspiring to a peaceful global society will require a framework that acknowledges and skillfully disarms and disables bad actors committed to doing harm. It will require the will and means to conquer war. The Shambhala lineage does not provide a handbook for resolving political issues, but there are definite suggestions regarding how to act skillfully and compassionately as a protector of sanity. For example, the teaching known as the 4 karmas, or 4 skillful actions, finds its root in the Tantric Buddhist lineages of India and is an important pillar of the Shambhala lineage. The 4 actions can be viewed in the context of actions between individuals or at the societal level. The 4 actions are pacifying, enriching, magnetizing, and wrathful action. First, pacifying action acknowledges a situation from a neutral space that is large enough to grasp the immediacy of the threat as well as the aggressor's motivations and pain. Pacifying requires an acknowledgement that below the rage and paranoia of war, there is a human heart trying to resolve its aspirations. When rage meets gentleness and care, it can become confused and in some cases collapse on itself. Genuine gentleness and precision in our communications could be the most advanced weapon we could deploy. Second, enriching action acknowledges and understands an aggressor's motivation and seeks to undermine the root motivation for war by providing what is lacking. There could be a lack of economic power, political power, spiritual fulfillment, ethnic or national pride, or control over the development of culture. Destroying an enemy for its own sake is not usually a root motivation, even though the root motivation may be obscured by decades or centuries of conflict. Enriching is a genuine attempt to provide what is needed and wanted at whatever level that might be. However, this might not be possible or effective. Third, magnetizing. Magnetizing action works with the energies of seduction and attraction. It establishes common interests and pulls the enemy close to divert the energy of conflict into the energy of cooperation and collaboration. It attracts energy, interest, and participation. Possibly it brings in third and fourth parties or other resources to change the dynamic of the situation. Compared to the first two, it may be a radical step. Finding common ground between parties is usually not obvious. Otherwise, why would conflict arise in the first place? But it takes a direct and somewhat outrageous approach by not acknowledging and reinforcing separateness, but leaping to the search for unity of purpose. It is again enabled by a conviction in the basic goodness of the other. And if such a leap is unsuccessful, then we move to wrathful action. Fourth, wrathful action is the last resort. When all previous strategies have been exhausted and the aggressor is still intent on inflicting harm, then abrupt action that interrupts that possibility is carried out. In a more general sense, it is action that destroys the root of confusion. It is important to note that motivation for wrathful action is the same as the earlier actions. It is compassion. To be genuine and skillful, the action will be free from anger or fearfulness and imbued with genuine caring and prayer for the well-being of all. So here we are emphasizing the active and dynamic dimension of peaceful coexistence, which we are calling protection. Expanded to a global scale, it is an ongoing relationship between countless parties to mutually fulfill their aspirations. It is a process of interaction, not a static state. In our age, there seems to be a tendency to move to an unenlightened version of wrathful action as a first step, and to do so blindly, following the motivations of fear and anger. One message we could deliver to any and all parties is to fully exhaust all other pathways to fulfilling societal aspirations before prosecuting war. What is the role of spiritual leadership? In order to conquer war and act upon our aspiration for peace, we can start by refining our abilities as leaders of our communities. There is no shortage of teachings on leadership in the marketplace of ideas, but I thought I would offer the 6 principles of leadership from the Shambhala Buddhist tradition that find their origin from the first Sakyong, or king of Shambhala, Dawa Sangpo. Sakyong is a Tibetan word. Sa means earth, Kyung means protector. So the king of Shambhala was known as Earth Protector. And his 6 ways of ruling were as follows. 1, benevolent. We act with great gentleness and are free from aggression. 2, true. We are stable, solid, mountain-like, and completely sane, so that we are not shaken by events or demands of the world. 3, genuine. We do not lose track of our own wisdom and noble heart. We continue looking upward and cultivate growth and development of those around us. 4, fearless. We are grounded in our own understanding and therefore completely willing to work with others, even if they do not agree with us. 5, artful. We can enlist the right helpers for the right roles, showing appreciation for the qualities of people and environment. We pay attention to the details of our world. And 6, rejoicing. We include generous encouragement and celebration, which allows love and care to flow. If you're interested in an extended commentary on these teachings of leadership, you could refer to the book Ruling Your World by the Sakyong Mipam Rinpoche. Peaceful coexistence requires a rousing of the human spirit that can unite a visionary approach that touches the sublime aspects of experience, the spiritual, with the practicalities of the earth on which we live. In Shambhala, we have a shorthand for this vision. We call it joining heaven, earth, and humanity. Peaceful coexistence between parties that may disagree on much, including religious belief and practice, becomes possible when a society shares enlightened principles such as respect for the basic goodness of others and the value of cultivating the virtue of generosity. In human life, conflict is inevitable, and in fact, is not necessarily bad. A strong and successful society must be able to accommodate and resolve human conflict without physical or psychological violence. And this brings us back to the individual. As leaders and citizens, our primary social responsibility is to understand and conquer the seeds of self-centeredness in ourselves and others so that our innate virtue can shine forth without obstruction. Then, naturally, our words and deeds that offer kindness and insight will bring a more peaceful and prosperous world. I think the great spiritual traditions would agree on this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And you're willing to take a question or two?
Sure.
Thank you. As moderator, I'll begin. First of all, I just want to say you gave us a very compelling and very complete view of our systematic view of what we are as human beings and what it means to be a human being, based on an understanding of human nature as unconditional goodness and free of fear. We had two very different presentations here this morning, both excellent. This basic nature of humanity that you talk about, can you talk a little bit about how that arose, where that arises, where that comes from? Because when I say we had different presentations, I didn't hear the mention of God once in the presentation, which I'm not surprised by, being a Buddhist, but I thought you might want to elaborate on where does this basic good human nature come from?
Well, as we say, basic goodness is primordially present in all of us, and in fact, all phenomena. I suppose if you wanted to use the word God, you could do that. God is a transcendent principle representing all of reality, and basic goodness is maybe using different words to talk about the same principle. However, in my tradition, we don't objectify a God as a being. We acknowledge self-existing wisdom, self-existing sacredness as the primordial ground of all. That's how a sacred and spiritual life is possible, that is true. And that is how different faiths can express their spirituality through different forms. So I don't think we're tremendously off here. But the basic notion is that how we view ourselves is the key to how we view ourselves in society, and then how, in turn, how society views itself.
Thank you, Robert. Other questions? You want to pick, or should I?
Thank you. Thank you so very much for your beautiful presentation and giving us, like the moderator said, this complete view of the Shambhala aspect of looking at the world. So my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is the Shambhala way belongs to the broader Buddhist path of looking at the world. And I'm using that to get to Buddha himself, who is considered throughout history, to my knowledge, as somebody who came to bring peace, not only outward peace, but inner peace In fact, in the Muslim tradition, which I belong to, I heard one of my professors saying to me, I have not read it directly, that some scholars said that Buddha was a messenger, and we cannot refute that and we cannot confirm it because he said he taught how to fight against Satan, because he taught you how to fight against your own evil self, which Satan exploits. So I'm looking at the world today, and we're here today to talk about how we together think about global peace from the perspective of religion and what our duties are towards that. And I cannot help but think of Myanmar, which was formerly called Burma, where you have people of indigenous people, some of whom have chosen to become Muslims over generations. And they are, to my knowledge, and you can correct me because maybe you are closer to it, I don't want to, I'm also going by what I hear in the media purely, that the Muslims in that place have been persecuted, killed, beaten, driven out. They have been to boats, to other places to live. And I know this is not what Buddha came to preach. And I know that this does not represent Buddhism. So my wonder is there anything people from the Buddhist religion, the Buddhist path, are doing? We're not hearing very much as to what is happening there. And so if you can just enlighten us, do you have any knowledge? Do you know what's happening there? Are there reconciliations? Is this fighting heading to finish? Are people, what is going on there?
What is going on?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. Well, yes, contrary to popular belief, Buddhists do sometimes go to war. Generally, they're based on ethnic separations and trying to resolve ethnic conflict. So they are not immune to confusion, paranoia, and aggression. I can't speak for the Myanmar conflict directly, and I really have no firsthand experience. But in terms of how one works with it, one would hope that the Buddhist leadership would be trying to provide some guidance on how to overcome these very entrenched conflicts. As I said in my talk, there are ways in which we can work with aggression and conflict. It's our opportunity and our duty to apply those. Unfortunately, war exists. So, again, my teacher always made the point that we must begin with personal transformation. Transformation that is thorough, genuine, and that without that, any attempt to make peace in the world will probably create more conflict. So that's all I can offer on that score.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Kathleen Codd, and I'm also, in my volunteer work, I do work with seniors, advocacy for seniors. A lot of what we see are people of various spiritual paths when I'm doing advocacy work that are mostly just afraid. And the gentleman that opened the day started talking about words of encouragement and how much of a difference that makes to overcome fear. Yesterday I noticed on Twitter there was a whole movement going on to send words of encouragement to our American friends. And I thought, geez, what a nice practical thing to do. It doesn't cost anything. I don't have to go to any special place to do it. I can just simply send a word of encouragement. And at the base of all that has been said so far today, great words of wisdom, that's really at the base of it all. You know, some of the things that you spoke of from the Buddhist path, really as a mother, I think that's who I am. You know, I'm an instrument of God as I am a mother, and encouraging my children to go out into the world and give peace a chance and have that as an opportunity. And I think sometimes we miss the very basic practical things because we get kind of heady in our experience of who we think we are. And we forget the very basic principles of just reaching out and embracing the person beside you. Even entering this room, I intentionally entered to sit at the very center of what was happening, and then observed as each one of us went to our places of comfort to be amongst people that we know. But I think it requires us to reach out and touch another human being, whether it's Twitter or the person sitting beside you. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother. You mentioned two words that have great relevance. Your portrait was heavily humanistic until a little later you made reference to God as the center of our being. But you made a big point here of alienation from ourselves earlier in the speech.
Yes.
And not knowing ourselves.
Yes.
And having faith in ourselves. Socrates says, know thyself is the source of peace, not the ego self. Shakespeare says, to thine own self be true, not the ego self, but the true self. And then you talk about faith in self is not faith in the ego self. Or if I esteem myself, it's not the ego self, it's the true self that the Hindus talk about, which is the Atma, or the soul. So my question is, without a sense of self in human personality, there is deep anxiety and alienation. And this age, with all its scientific marvels and technological marvels, is not known as the age of enlightenment, reason, or progress, but the age of anxiety because of what you mentioned earlier, alienation from the self. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, self-loathing. The younger generation is particularly susceptible to a sense of alienation, which is highly destructive and disorienting. So let's be sensitive to trying to heal that. And that's what I was talking about during my talk. So thank you. How's our time? I think it's 11 o'clock.
Yeah, thank you, Shastri Gailey. I guess we'll end here.
Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
thank you so much for your... So now we've worked up a good appetite, and there are some refreshments at the back. We'll take a 10-minute break. And thank you so much to both of our keynote speakers for your wonderful sharing this morning, and Norm for your moderating. And enjoy the break. Oh, by the way, if you are a Twitter person, you can hashtag spiritual diversity.